The National Assembly has passed the 2023 budget with an upward review of 20.5 trillion naira, presented by President Muhammadu Buhari to 21.8 trillion naira, an increase of 1.3 trillion naira. Both the Senate and the House of Representatives passed the appropriation bill in addition to a 2022 supplementary budget. Arise correspondent Tunji Olanipekun filed in this report.
The oil benchmark was increased from $70 to $75 per barrel to reflect the current values in the international market. Nigeria's daily oil production was pegged at 1.69 million barrels per day, while the exchange rate is put at 435 naira to the dollar. In the budget, about 967 billion naira is for statutory transfers, 6.5 trillion for debt service, more than 8 trillion for recurrent expenditure, while about 6 trillion naira is for contribution to the Development Fund for capital expenditure.
It is important to state that the committee worked harmoniously with the executive arm of government and its counterpart in the House of Representatives in the processing of this bill, which ensured the collaboration of the National Assembly and the executive arm of government in the discovery and utilization of additional revenue projections to fund or improve the funding of some critical projects.
Total capital expenditure 5,972,734,929,421 naira only. Those who are the distance part of the bill say aye. Those against say nay, the ayes have. Aggregate expenditure 21,827,188,747,391 naira only. Those who are the distance part of the bill say aye. Those against say nay, the ayes have it.
The presiding officers commended lawmakers for maintaining the budget cycle of January to December, noting that the 2023 budget is the fourth and final budget to be passed by the 9th National Assembly.
The committee observed the following: the effects of the 2022 flood across the country and its attendant consequences on the roads, bridges, farmlands, and water sector necessitated the supplementary appropriation bill. MDS involved in the supplementary appropriation bill's requests are Federal Minister of Agriculture and Rural Development, Federal Minister of Works and Housing, Federal Minister of Water Resources.
There are about 11 laws which the bill seeks to amend, which consist of about 28 clauses. The proposals include amendment to the Capital Gains Tax, Company Income Tax, Custom, Excise and Tariff Act, Personal Income Tax, Petroleum Profit Tax, Stamp Duties Act, Value Added Tax, Corrupt Practices and Other Related Offences Act, Public Procurement Act, and Federal Inland Revenue Service Establishment Act, and Tertiary Education Tax Trust Fund Act.
Any action we are going to take to lay a foundation for government expenditure for 2023 should consider leveraging and then mitigating the hardship that Nigerians are facing, not to act in a way that will increase that hardship, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Chairman, this bill here seeks to make amendment, just like the DS has said, to certain provisions of very statutory legislations. Mr. Chairman, for example, clauses 19 through 26 is making very fundamental amendment to the Federal Inland Revenue Service Establishment Act. This is an act that stands the test of time, and we are using a piece of legislation that is going to last only for a year to make critical amendment to a piece of legislation that has been over time.
The National Assembly also passed a supplementary budget of 819 billion naira for the 2022 fiscal year and extended the implementation of the 2022 budget till March 31st, 2023. However, there was uproar in the Senate over requests from President Muhammadu Buhari for restructuring of a 22.7 trillion naira ways and means advances collected by the federal government from Central Bank of Nigeria over the last 10 years. The ways and means are advances from the central bank to the federal government for emergency funding of delayed receipt of fiscal deficit. However, Senators rejected the request.
Mr. President, I don't want us to exercise any fear about what is contained in this. It's normal. We should even commend the government for bringing this information out. It's here. The Senate that is sitting on the 22nd December 2023.
The Senate then went into a closed session for about 1.5 hours and emerged with a resolution to step down restructuring of the 22.7 trillion naira Ways and Means advances.
Okay, I mean, a lot has to be said, Ayo.
Yes, a lot has to be said. Well, shall we say kudos to the National Assembly for the 9th National Assembly. This is the last budget, an appropriation bill that will be passing before we transition to the next. And just to mention that consecutively, they have been able to maintain the January to December passage. And that aside, let's now go into some of the concerns raised with regards to the budget. Some developments around the deficit, the budget deficit, which compared to last year is over 10 trillion naira, and which has been said by the Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning to be funded largely by borrowing. The President has themed this the budget of fiscal sustainability and transition in recognition of the current state of the economy and, of course, transitioning to the next government come May 2023. And the budget is meant to be an ease for the next government in power. However, what analysts have said is that rather than it being an easy transition, it would actually be a burden, a debt burden for the next elected government. Why is this so? Now, an analyst, the LCCI, that's the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry DG, Dr. Chinyere Almona, had said, and let me quote what she said: the implications of the massive borrowing by the government to the economy are enormous. We've talked about the impact of borrowing again and again on this, including, and some of these implications include crowding out credit to the private sector, increasing the cost of debt servicing, and making the economy more vulnerable to unforeseeable shocks in an election year. The budget has been pegged of crude oil prices $75 per barrel, currently $79 per barrel. So this has been raised from the initial 70 based on the current realities and the upward of crude oil prices across the world. Now, crude oil production has also been pegged at 1.69 million barrels per day. Currently, Nigeria is doing 1.2. This year saw one of the lowest production of crude oil based on a number of factors, chief of which was oil theft, which the NNPCL had assured Nigerians again and again that they had been making concerted efforts to ensure that this wouldn't, they would curb the menace of oil theft. So they're being optimistic with regards to the barrels per day that will be produced, and obviously its impact on revenue. Again, optimism on that, right? They've also said pegged exchange rates at 435 to a dollar. Currently, we're doing 446 to a dollar in the exchange rate. GDP growth rate at 3.75%, inflation rate at 17.16%. Currently, we are at 21%. Just to mention a few positives with regards to the budget that's been passed. It's been said to be a budget of fiscal sustainability, and when you're talking about this, you must look at key infrastructure, including education, health, and for the first time, Nigeria has passed the 1 trillion mark with regards to its allocation to education. The UNICEF recommended allocation percentage of the budget is 26%. We're still doing a lot lower than that at 6%, whilst a peer review with the second biggest economy in Africa, South Africa, is over 20%. Therefore, despite the increase, which has been significant based on previous budgets, it still falls below the recommended. Same with health. Health also passing the $1 trillion mark, however, still way below the recommended WHO allocation. Again, to wrap up in this segment is that, for my thoughts, my view is that despite the aggregate increase of the budget, however, the inflation rate makes it clear that we are poorer than the last budget of 2022. It still begs to question as to how this budget will be funded, bearing in mind that with the extension to the fulfillment of the 2022 budget to March, we haven't been able to, in terms of expenditure and based on revenue. You would wonder how we hope to fund this budget, which unfortunately doesn't seem realistic.
Dr. Bati?
Okay, the Buhari administration has consistently met the budget cycle. The budget cycle is January 1 to December. So they've done it again this time. But one issue that came up before the National Assembly was a request by the president that there should be an extension of 90 days for aspects of that 2022 budget that had not yet been implemented to be extended. And indeed, the law provides for that. So the Senate has granted 90 days to cover those capital projects that were not covered within the budget cycle because of the late release of funds. So that was the explanation that was given with that regard, and that didn't generate any much controversy. However, if you look at the details of the budget, as has been the case over the years, debt service is over 6 trillion. Recurrent expenditure is over 8 trillion. That's non-debt domestic expenditure. Capital project is 5.9 trillion. In other words, when you look at all of this in terms of percentages, there isn't much for capital expenditure. And what was said is that whatever deficit that may be recorded in the 2023 budget will be funded via ways and means. And a provision of 4.49 trillion is made for ways and means funding. Now, what is ways and means? Big issue. I'll come to it later. Now, if you look at the benchmarks are not realistic. Inflation is pegged at about 17.6%. Already, December 2022, we're doing 21.47% inflation rate. There's no guarantee that by the time December figures come out, it will not even be higher than that. Some people even say the rate of inflation in the country is much higher than that. Oil production is pegged at 1.69 million barrels per day, including condensates. We've not been able to meet that target, but there has been an improvement, according to the upstream regulatory agency, and the fact that Shell has returned to the Forcados terminal, and they are hoping that with increased activity in checking crude oil theft, that there will be better improvement in that regard. The exchange rate is pegged at 435 naira. Well, is that even realistic? 435 naira to the dollar in a regime where we don't have a unified single exchange rate. Yes, GDP growth is projected at 3.75%. I thought about 2 months ago, even the World Bank had reviewed that downwards, whereas our expectation is that Nigeria, in the worst of times, should be able to do double-digit, growth rate, but we're even talking about 3.75. So, in terms of the benchmarks, this is also a problematic budget. I don't see how it will amount to fiscal sustainability. Only 2 weeks ago, the World Bank was saying one of the things Nigeria needs to address is fiscal prudence, fiscal discipline, business unusual choices. So if you look at this budget that is being put on the table, there's nothing like business unusual there. It's the same old story. And to go to ways and means. Ways and means, when expected receipts do not come to finance deficits, federal government goes to the CBN to print money. It just means print money. And in the last, as of this December, the ways and means, the figure is over 22 trillion. And that is higher than the budget estimate for the whole of 2022, which was a little over 17 trillion. So we borrowed more ways and means to fund the 2022 budget. However, where the problem lies, which caused the row in the National Assembly, is that government cannot explain what it has done with the ways and means of 22.7 trillion. The CBN was just printing money. They even talk about securitizing it. Whereas what the Act says, the CBN Act says, is that you cannot print money unless you have retired what you borrowed before. Yes. So they have not retired it. Nobody even knows what the money was spent upon. So that is the bone of contention. And the lawmakers, they were quite right in saying, no, this has to be suspended. And they've set up a committee, an ad hoc committee, that will report back to plenary on January 17 to explain what Nigeria did with 22.7 trillion. Senator Sekibo brought up a very valid point, quoting Section 80 of the Constitution, Section 81 of the Constitution, and also Section 38 of the CBN Act. Okay? That, look, any money at all that comes into the coffers, into the Consolidated Revenue Fund, right, must go in there. It's not money, you can't just print money and just spend it, and nobody knows what the money was spent for. If we're not careful, the same pattern will continue in the year 2023. So the lawmakers, they are in order in that particular regard, because Nigerians would like to know. The other issue that came up there was that the National Assembly passed the finance bill, the 2022 finance bill, which has been on the table since. There are controversial aspects of that finance bill, either the telecom tax or some other, taxes, even stamp duty and all of that, on which many Nigerians would also like to have information. In other words, you cannot run the economy, in a manner that is not transparent, with a lot of opaqueness, and, well, we'll see how it goes, whether the Senate, the National Assembly, will have the courage to see this to the logical end, because you see that the Senate is already divided, with some lawmakers standing up and saying, oh, what the federal government has done. Well, the person saying that was probably speaking from a position of ignorance. If you are a senator, it doesn't mean you have any clue about the appropriation process.
Well. It's official. We've run the country aground. We've put the economy on its knees and we've shattered it. This budget will not make any difference. I just hope I have the time to analyze. Please. At first, you have a budget where your recurrent expenditure is more than your capital expenditure. Then you are joking. Till date, because we've not been able to implement provisions of the Orosoye reports, our recurrent expenditure is still high. And it has been like that for a while. Madam Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, I tried reducing it a bit, but you can see there 8.3 trillion. And your capital expenditure is 5.9 trillion. Your debt service, 6.5 trillion. Also, are you going to add subsidy to that money? What we should even look at is your profit or your revenue projections for the year. The revenue projections for the year is a little over 9 trillion. And you have a budget now that you've increased to 21 trillion. Obviously, you know your budget performance will be below par, because I don't see where we're going to get all the money. Even if worst case scenario, ways and means, the CBN prints another 4 trillion. I hope you know the consequence of printing that money. Inflation will increase. So when you put a benchmark of 17% inflation and you want to go and print 4 trillion, you're deceiving yourself. There's inflation again this year. And it can only increase because it is the ways and means over the years that put us here. And now, the federal government want to be the custodian of breaking the law. How do we even do this in this country? A CBN Act that you saw, you are trying to use the National Assembly to break law with you. And some senators stood up and said, we should thank the federal government for coming to show us that they want to break the law. We've become a joke in this country. You see, I always say it, my maths teacher, Ms. Brahimo, we say common sense is not common. A senator of the Federal Republic is thanking the federal government for bringing a proposition to breaking the law. At first, the federal government broke the law with the ways and means. You are not supposed to take in excess of 5% of the preceding year's revenue. We have taken more than that. We will take more. And some senator is saying we should applaud the federal government for breaking the law. And the laws are stated there. It's even in the Constitution, Section 80, 81.
And 83.
And 83. Then it's even in the CBN Act.
Section
so
38.
a senator is excited to come on the House and thank the federal government for bridging the Constitution. Then as we go further, what do we expect? It's going to be more hardship for the people in 2023. Two suggestions. In all of this, we will still have contracts that will not be done because multiple contracts will be added. Contract variation scam will still happen. There will not be integrity. We've not been able to ascertain the cost-benefit analysis of the budget. We don't have an ombudsman office that checks the budget in its entirety. I mean, because of the want of time, I would stop here. But here goes your 2023 budget.